Hello, everyone, and welcome to City Lyric Opera. Haven't said that in a minute. Christ. City Lyric Opera's State of the Arts panel. I am Nehemiah Roll. I am a board member here and also your host and moderator for this conversation this evening. So normally CLO for their opener, they'll do a cocktail reception. There will be gorgeous music. You will hear from Megan about the season's programming and vision for the season, and we'll all toast to CLO's future and a fantastic season of opera. Well, things are a bit different this year, and we would be remiss, honestly, if we didn't have this moment to kind of convene a conversation about the state of the arts right now. We are post-quarantine here in New York, kind of return to live performance. And at the same time, COVID is still impacting our industry. And so we wanted to make sure that we held space for both the changes that were happening prior to COVID and why COVID is an inflection point for us right now, and also a way in which we can build a more inclusive and equitable industry and also just art form. So today's conversation, you'll hear from a variety of voices and perspectives. To my right, I have Megan Guinness. Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. She is CLO's executive director. And to my right, I also have Michelle Rafrano, conductor and CLO's resident music director. And then to my left, I have Alex Chung. And she is a mezzo-soprano, I believe, right?
Yes.
Perfect. And then I have the icon themselves, James Smith. How you doing, James?
What's up?
So, for the first part of our evening tonight, we're going to have a brief conversation about, like I said, the changes that we're seeing in the industry and some of that resistance to those changes and what we want to see differently going forward. And then we'll have time for a Q&A where our lovely audience here can ask the questions of the panel. And then also, if you are a live stream guest, hello. We want you to also participate in the conversation as well. So if anything resonates, feel free to comment in the comment section, and we'll probably include your voice in the conversation. So, first question. I know one of the reasons why we wanted to convene this conversation is because changes in young artist development are happening, despite resistance from traditional gatekeepers and others in the opera industry that are invested in the status quo. So can one of you share with us what are a few of those changes?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a big change today in the opera industry where suddenly artists are getting out into the world and realizing that there's no one way to have a career in opera. And I think that's very different from what we've been told, what we have been fed up through our artistic processes, up through all of our training, that we're kind of told that, you go to school, you go to undergrad, then you go to grad school, and then you get in a young artist program, and then you start working at houses, and that's kind of the one true path. And people are getting out in the industry and realizing that that's not the path necessarily, or that's maybe not the path that works for them, or, to be frank, that's not the path where there are any jobs anymore. And so you're having an influx of artists that are now realizing that, I need to make my own path. I need to figure out how I can have a career in opera and have a career in this industry that is beneficial to me, that means something to me. It really resonates with who I am as a person. So I think also to that point, a lot of students coming up in the conservatory system, I came up in this conservatory system, that, you spend so many years studying and learning and training to be one version of what it means to be an opera singer, and then you get out in the industry and you have casting directors, stage directors, you have producers and music coaches telling you to make choices, to be innovative, to be creative, and you're like, I don't know how to be creative. I haven't been taught how to be creative. I've been taught how to sing like Maria Callas, and there's only one true Maria Callas. And so I think that was really one of the impetus for forming CLO, for founding CLO when Katie and I did, to give a home to artists to learn how to be creative, to be sloppy, to be messy, to be able to make their own choices. That's something that now in season 7 still really, really resonates with me as a producer and as executive director of CLO. But I think it is a real problem that you have people that have been fed one version of a story up until 22 or 24, and then you get out in an industry that isn't prepared to support that story.
Very, very true. And I think speaking of stories, Alice, I feel like you have several experiences that both speak to that and also can round out some of this perspective.
Absolutely. I was one of those people who actually did go through the Young Artist Program path, as well as certain training programs. And I believe that it is definitely a way, but I didn't feel like I was a true artist. Where I transitioned from young artist to artist, I should say, was actually through COVID. Through COVID, there are several stories I heard from my friends, regarding being Asian and how there's so much xenophobia around us, and it really made me think about who I am, what makes me me rather than trying to be Maria Callas like you said, and how I want to contribute to the art world and what do I have to say. And I feel like that has been the key to everything, how I want to lay out and see my career. And I feel like that's the advice that I would give. Whether you are going through the Young Artist Program or you have never done one, and I've met several people who have never done one, and they're plentifully successful. And I care more about what one has to say as an artist rather than being one small part of the industry.
And I guess I would piggyback off of that is to say that, artists aren't the only ones that are facing some of these issues, that when we look at companies really being faced with kind of the old guard versus a new guard, whatever that means or whatever that's supposed to mean. I think that, a lot of the choices that our industry has been forced into making have been because the money wants to see Zeffirelli Bohèmes. They want to see it snow on stage. And it's beautiful and gorgeous and wonderful and amazing the first time. But now we're looking at trying to be innovative and trying to do new things. And people are really scared to be able to do that, or feel like there's not an opportunity or a means to be able to make innovative choices because the industry doesn't support those choices or doesn't have room or space for them. And I think that there's kind of this juxtaposition, this real battle, I guess, between what does opera mean? What does opera encompass nowadays? There's so much new work coming out that's incredible. There's so many new works, new compositions coming out every single year, every single day. And then that's also juxtaposed between there's so many great works of art that either have never been touched or aren't done a lot or are done one way but maybe haven't been done a different way, haven't been looked at in a different way. I think that there is so much room for innovation in this industry, and we as I definitely find this as producers. If I'm looking to get bodies and seats, I'm in a program a Figaro. I'm in a program something that is gonna speak to be able to get bodies and seats, and it sucks to feel like you're forced into you're kind of pigeonholed into a certain way or a certain repertoire choice or a certain path or something because you're kind of warring between you're kind of trying to play both fields or kind of warring between the two sides.
So this kind of desire and vision for disrupting this one way of doing things definitely is meeting some resistance. Speaking of, I guess, resistance, one here, and then also, what are those kind of forms of resistance, and what is the kind of origin of these fears and resistance?
I think that there can be a lot of different origins for that. I think that opera in and of itself, the performing arts in and of itself, like this is a business. As much as the world wants to say and as much as the world wants to tell you that we're speaking towards a higher power or a higher art form, that's amazing, and I think that's really powerful. But we as artists, we're not taught that this is a business. We're taught that we're serving an artist, that we're serving like this higher power for so long, and then you get out in the world and you're like, oh, I really wish I could have taken a marketing class or like had figured out how to do this. And so I think that there is this crux between how do we run this business while also serving whatever higher power or art it is. I think we talked a lot about Michelle. Is that there's this fear of it, right? There's this like really, really big fear in the industry of like what happens if I do disrupt the status quo,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know we've had a lot of discussions about this for sure. It's really interesting coming out of COVID. Like, I think that's given us a lot of time to reflect on what the industry was and then what we lost, like what we could no longer have, right? And it pushed a lot of people to think outside the box and then also gave us time to, reflect on if what we were doing was what we wanted to be doing or if it was going through the motions, right? And I think as people, we all, have an innate, a little bit, suspicion, fear of change. Like, it's very comfortable to keep doing what you're doing, right? And, doing something different is obviously, it's scary. And so for companies, like you said, there's this idea that if you want to get butts in seats, you do something that people know, like name recognition. And the thing is, so there's name recognition that's like very familiar to audiences, but then there's also the familiarity, doing things how they've always been done, of like having certain singers who sing in a certain fach, like a certain voice type, just singing that repertoire. And so that's, on the part of companies. Like maybe there's a fear to have, direct a traditional opera in a different way than has been done before. Do repertoire that is not often done, that they're not sure how it'll sell. Then there's also, I think, a lot of fear on the part of artists to take risks because of the innate risks in the industry. So, coming out of young artist programs, it's not guaranteed that you'll necessarily get a job in this freelance industry. And so, on the one hand, on every hand, taking risks and being yourself is what sets you apart from other artists. But if you are coming out of school and coming out of young artist programs being told, you should sing this repertoire, you should act this way, you should portray yourself this way, you should look this way, you should only look one way, speaking to diversity of, racial diversity, gender diversity, diversity of types of bodies. If you're told this is the one way you should be, you should try to fit yourself into this very small mold, be small, or you won't get employed. And a lot of teachers, a lot of mentors say that with the best of intentions to try to give you advice on like, this is how you could be hireable. But the thing is then if you're not yourself, how do you stand out from anyone else? Right? So it's counterintuitive, and then at the same time, like with companies, if you don't do anything different than you've normally done, then what makes you interesting? Like, why would someone come to see you over going to a different, to a play or to a movie or something? Like, what are you doing that is different? Why would someone choose you over someone else? So, I don't know. I don't have an exact answer of how to break that, but I do really strongly believe what we're doing and living in fear of trying to be something we're not, or being scared to be ourselves, is not working, is not interesting. It's not how you make interesting art.
So I guess
if you don't mind, I
Yeah.
would love to add to that, especially coming from the Young Artist Program perspective. I feel that because there's such a systemic culture of sacrificing, self-sacrifice. I mean, not just from artists, but also from companies. Like, before COVID, like we really were constantly, especially in this capitalist society, we are constantly pushing ourselves to make this work. The show must go on. And then finally, when COVID happened, everything just stopped. And I think it was very blatant to us now that we stopped that there were some cracks that needed more repair. And then now that we're trying to go back to this, what it used to be, when it can't, it needs to be a new normal. Things are what we see them as breaking down. And with young artists, I think we were also given the time to see what do I want to make out of my life? What do I want to say about being an artist? And also and the transition from young artist to artist is so difficult. I feel because of this decades of young artist programs, there's been this, not always, but there's certain behavior that kind of pigeonholes you into being a young artist, being told what to do, being told what to be, what to say, how to act, how to sing. And then at some point, how are you any different from a robot? How are you supposed to find who you are as an artist until you break out of that mold or you're finally out of the program? And all of these things that we're taught to do, we're trained to do, ultimately is counter-effective to then becoming an artist, becoming a star. And moving forward, I would love to see young artist programs focusing a lot more on individualizing things for people, and also the individual focusing on that for themselves, making opportunities for themselves, like not being afraid, especially now that technology has helped us so much, producing recitals, collaborating a lot more, making smaller scale works that like it would be easy to partner up with an organization and put something on.
Well, speaking of individualizing, I would love to talk about how this tension really is having an impact on young artists themselves. I know, James, you're a voice teacher, and so I would love to hear from your perspective in particular, what kind of impact is this tension having on young artists?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the challenges that young singers and old singers and middle-aged singers and whatever are facing now particularly is this idea that this whole aspect of marketability and how do you fit into this kind of narrow scope of how do we use you for a season, for a show, for one role, right? And we're basing the entire developmental process from people top to bottom basically on like how do you fit into this industry as like a functional piece, right? As opposed to what do you have to say, what are your interests, how do you interpret these works, and like not to push back too much or to be a Callis stan, but I certainly will be on camera. I feel like Callis is the opposite person to indict of like, oh, we should all sound like Maria Callas. I feel like the whole legend of her was that she went so against this idea of like we sing specific things, we do a thing that's marketable, we do something that's palatable. Her whole entire legend is around the fact that she was like a pop star and she sang Elvira and Isolde and Turandot and Brunhilde and Lucia, and she said, I get one per two.
You get
I
two,
don't
you
fucking
get two.
care what you want to see from me. I am Callis. I am this person, right? And this is what I think as singers, all of us, there's more of us than there are of them, right? And we can stand up and say like, no, I'm not your Carabino next season, and for the next 17 seasons, like I can be. So, and if that's your zhuzh, fine. But like, we have to stop seeing ourselves in the context of like, I have to get this person at this opera company to like me, to cast me in this. It's like we have to start conceiving of ourselves as artistic, independent, star quality personalities. And regardless of whether or not we arrive at this position of like, okay, I have this career or whatever, if we conceive of ourselves in this way, that's going to be better for everybody, right? It's better for us, it's better for them. So I would just love to see, singers, young singers coming up, stop being so concerned with what the industry types think of us and start spending way more time thinking about who am I, what do I have to say, how do I relate to my peers? Because the thing is like there's such a narrow envelope of opportunity within the opera industry that you can't keep leaving that as your only avenue, right? So like those of us that either are not interested in that or are feeling ourselves not really picked up by that can say like, hey, like there's still a lot of us around, and we can collaborate in this way and not based on this like how do I fit into this piece, but like what do I mean myself, And I think basically coming back to in my role as a teacher, like the challenge that I come up against is all these singers that have been convinced that they're only worth something if they fit into the piece of the puzzle, and it's sad. It's really sad to come up against. From a creative perspective, as a creative consultant, somebody that, I mostly work in a creative consultant capacity, to have these singers that are just like, how do I fit in? I'm like, it's not about that, That's not what any of this is about,
And I feel like folks definitely on this panel and folks probably watching are all snapping with all of us here. But then 3 years ago, something called COVID said, wham,
Yeah.
I'm here and I have thoughts. So what impact do you all think that COVID had on these conversations?
Oh, Lord. I guess I'll start, and then whoever wants to also answer. I guess my big answer is I don't know. I think that, we've been trying to have these conversations about the repercussions of COVID and what COVID has done to our industry and all of that. And, I still very distinctly remember the day the gigs died and how visceral of a feeling that was, and how sad it is, how horrifying it is to realize that this thing that you've worked for me, this career that I worked in for 15 years was gone all of a sudden, and in 12 hours and in one day, and that people didn't. Couldn't understand that, couldn't relate to that in ways that other people in our industry, in the arts industry, and musical theater, Broadway, everything that people in this artistic career path very viscerally get. And so, we're still facing repercussions from COVID today, because COVID is very much not over. Whether that's shows that are trying, we produced our very first live show in 2.5 years. We had to cancel halfway through the run because of COVID. And it was truly one of the most heartbreaking experiences, A, because it had to be done, and B, because it felt like that day all over again. We're going to be facing and dealing with this trauma of that day and of the last 2 years for years and years and years to come. And so, I can't speak in a 30-second soundbite what COVID has done to our industry, because honestly, that's why I'm in therapy. So, and that's Lindsay's problem to sort out. So, but it's, I think there has been, obviously we're coming back to live theater, which is incredible and amazing. But I do think it's kind of flip-flopped, right? Because you had a year and a half where no one's doing anything, and we're sitting at home twiddling our thumbs or being like, do I go to grad school? Do I go to culinary school? What do I do? And trying to figure that out. And now we're back kind of into live theater, and everyone I know is burnt out. Everyone I know is working so hard, is taking every gig that they possibly can get, because they don't know if this next gig is going to be their last one, and we're going to have another March 17th on our hand. And everyone I know in this industry is at their absolute wit's end. Yeah, so I don't know.
I can speak to that. Feel that, for sure. No, this kind of goes back to the idea of fear in the industry, where there was this fear before COVID of like not getting hired if I don't fit a mold, and young people coming out of conservatories and young artist programs. Like, it is frustrating and sad to see people be afraid to be themselves, but there, for sure, the burnout is real among opera administrators, performers, everyone, of feeling, as you said, the need to just like take all of these gigs and come back with a vengeance. And also too, like, seasons were planned much more last minute. Once people realized this past season we could do a lot more things in person, so everyone was like, wow, I went from 0 to 60 in a second, and now I have all this music to learn and all these places to travel, and I have to, and it's a lot, right? And that's not sustainable either. So that is something to consider. If that, I feel like we left, for me, some things that I learned from the pandemic. It was the first time, so being out of work, for the first time ever had everything canceled. It was as sad and upsetting as it was the first time in my life I ever got 8 hours of sleep a night, like genuinely. And despite being, depressed that I didn't have work, I was like, my mental health is way better, like getting sleep and like having time to like make my own dinner of food that's good for me. And like, you know what I mean? Not that I spent all of the pandemic like being so productive and like making healthy food. Like, no, let's not pretend. But do you know what I mean? Like, it made me realize that not everything before was like so healthy. And to come full circle here, for me, the pandemic also made me, to be honest, in a lot of ways less afraid. Because before, I, coming out of grad school, was working freelance as, opera, pianist for a bit, as an assistant conductor. As a conductor, was working my way up, and, finally had a full season as a conductor, like not even assisting, and then the pandemic hit, everything canceled. And so everything I had been working towards and like afraid I would never get, that it seemed like I was getting, was suddenly gone. And one of my favorite quotes is from the book by Orwell, Down and Out in Paris and London. And there's this fabulous quote that essentially is saying, like, there's a relief to finally being down and out. Like, there's a relief almost to finally, like, hitting the bottom and realizing I have nothing left to lose. The only way to go is up. And to be totally honest, the pandemic for me made me realize, like, you know, trying to fit myself into a box and trying to take all the advice from, like, conductors face pressure too, you know, from every conducting teacher and mentor, and be this, be that, and in a lot of ways advice that was well meant, but maybe was making me not necessarily be comfortable with myself as a person, because, you know, a young woman conductor is not, you know, the most conventional, you know, person you think of when you think of a conductor. You usually think of an old European man, right? So, which is, you know, great. There are many fabulous ones, but there are also many people who are talented conductors who don't look like that, right? And so having kind of lost everything made me realize, oh, I survived. What if I just started my own projects and followed my own passions and was myself? Like, what would happen? And I feel like I honestly have been much more myself since coming back from the pandemic, because it's kind of like, what do we have to lose? Like, if COVID come back tomorrow, we could have another pandemic tomorrow that's worse, stuff could be canceled. So, like, just, like, life is short. Be yourself, you know? Like, what do you have to lose if you already lost it all? Like, what do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It made me realize that, and it made me look at the industry with kind of new, you know, with the rose-colored glasses taken off of, like, what if more people could be themselves? What if we kept the things that were good and leaned into those and maybe tried to get back some of the ones that were lost? And what if we improved other things? Why not? What do we have to lose? We already lost it all. It could only get better. So I don't know. That's
I think
my way
that's.
of
I
thinking
mean,
of it.
I think that's really true. That a lot of companies, a lot of people, were kind of reached this breaking point where they're like, "Hey, what if I didn't? What if we just only programmed the things that I want to program with the people I want to program it with? And, like, what if we just did that? And that's okay." And I also, like, I love the amount of submissions that we've gotten from singers that are like, I'll say it, fuck a jewel tone dress. Like, you know, that they're like, hey, let's, I have my tattoos out. I shaved my head in COVID, and that's okay. You know, I had a really bad bathroom bleach dye, and we're gonna, like, do that and make it happen. I did. I cut all my hair off with kitchen scissors. It was great. And I think, to your point, that there has been this kind of new wave of artistic expression come out of COVID, where people were like, yeah, I was unemployed for so long and with nothing, and so I'm gonna come back as me, rather than come back as this version of me that you think I should be, which is really beautiful. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that. James, if you're seeing that with your students, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely in general there's a strong vibe, and myself included in this, you know, because COVID came right after I got out of school, and I was at this position where it was either like, okay, do I, like, go in deep to this whole auditioning for YAP situation or what? And before I could even answer that question for myself, COVID happened. So I was kind of just, like, stuck in my basement like everybody else, working from home, whatever. And I think collectively during that time, everybody kind of was like, had a second to kind of look behind the curtain and be like, there's nobody there. Like, this is complete fucking bullshit. There's my second one.
They're at home in quarantine.
I think everybody collectively had the opportunity a little bit to say, just like, what am I doing with myself? What am I working towards? What is the you know, the highest possible thing that I'm actually aspiring towards, and, like, do I actually want that? And I think in general, this whole experience has allowed people to consider themselves outside of the context of this, like, basically singular narrative of, like, undergrad, hopefully a good conservatory, hopefully a YAP or two in the summer, a year round, I get an agent, like, and then it basically starts coming together. It's allowed people to start being like, whether or not I get through that, there's no security, you know. They're like, so what does my life look like? Outside of this context. And I think generally in terms of, like, artistic freedom, it's certainly been a good thing, you know, because it's at least, like, gotten people to be like, whoa, like, maybe this is not the be all end all, you know, of this trajectory. So, I mean, there's obviously been, like, terrible challenges and horrible loss involved with COVID, but I think also in terms of, like, a wake-up call for, like, people that have inserted themselves into this, like, narrative of industrial success that has just become, like, unquestionable, you know. Nobody, at least in my experience as, like, somebody who was coming up to try and be a singer, pre-COVID that nobody was really questioning. Really, it was just like, well, this is what we do, and we do these auditions, and like all of a sudden everybody's like, okay, maybe this is not what I actually want to be doing, you know. So I in that regard, I feel like it's been very good in terms of like what people are willing to like interrogate and invest creatively, you know, outside of the spectrum of like, how am I marketable? How am I going to be in this career, etc. You know.
Absolutely. Anything to add, Alice? Or
I mean, I would just add that I agree with everyone here, and I think COVID, you know, it was a terrible loss, and it still is a terrible loss. You know, so many people. Yeah, it is ongoing. So much momentum, like, you know, just gone. However, like there is a silver lining to it, that I feel like there is this new energy that people started feeling, and people started realizing, what do they actually need from this industry in order for it to work for them?
Yeah.
And what are the changes in the industry that you want to see happen, not just for yourself, but in the future? And people are being more vocal about it, which is great, because honestly, you know, this industry would not exist without us.
Period.
And
100%.
it would not exist without working together, without having open communication, without fear, you know?
Yeah.
And so it may look like a mess right now, but I'm actually pretty determined, and I'm feeling positive about the changes that are happening and that are coming, and I encourage people to be more vocal, not necessarily, you know, incendiary, but, you know.
Well, I think, to speak to that, something that, as James was talking, that just popped into my brain. Post-COVID, since we started coming back into live theater and have started working with singers in a live capacity again, every single singer that we have worked with has negotiated their contract. Singers before COVID have never, maybe once or twice. Every single singer we work with has negotiated their contract. And that, like, I think that for so long, you know, you're taught as the artist, as the person in the center of the stage, you might be singing the high C at the end of the show or jumping off the battlements or whatever, but you are the lowest on the totem pole, that there is everyone else there in front of you that is more important than you, that is better than you know, that is more hierarchical or whatever than you. Mm-hmm. And I think that, to everyone's point, it's like all of a sudden you're giving people time and flexibility to realize, like, this is a job, guys. Like, this is not my life. Like, I obviously, as a singer who now turned, who doesn't sing as much anymore, you know, there's a real emotional battle that goes along with that, because, like, your instrument lives in your body. It is here inside of me, you know, and it's really hard to separate Megan the person from Megan the soprano. But also at the end of the day, Megan the soprano needs to advocate for herself and needs to learn how to not only advocate for yourself on stage with a scene partner, but advocate for yourself off stage as well. And I think that's one thing that COVID really has helped with, people being like, oh, right, the gigs are gone, but I'm still here, and I'm still a person, and I'm still interesting with my sourdough and my iced coffee or whatever, whipped coffee things. Like, I'm still a person with interest and value and good things to say and important things to say. So when I decide to return back to the industry, it is deciding to return back to the industry, and it's on my terms. So.
Honestly, I love you talking about people negotiating their contract.
Yeah.
And I would love to encourage all young singers, all people, and myself, like, always negotiate your contract. And by contract, I mean life. Like, you're the one who decides what you do with your life, right? Like, it's, like, easy to forget that when, like, your parents and your family and your friends and your teachers and the conservator and the business, like, tell you, do this, do that, hit this milestone. But, like, you don't have to. Like, no one, you know what I mean? Like, you can do this thing, you cannot do this thing. You can audition for this place, and if this place doesn't accept you, you can go find somewhere else that appreciates you for who you are. If this gig doesn't work out, or if this project doesn't work out, you can start your own thing. Like, if you're feeling kind of stuck with your teacher, you can find a new voice teacher. Like, if you are not being respected on a gig, And if, of course, you're in the financial position to do so, like, I mean, you can hopefully speak up and that won't affect, you having that job, but you also can leave. Like, if you're not, do you know what I mean? Like, you can negotiate your contract all the time. And I think it's very easy as people to not feel like we're empowered and to not feel like we have agency. And of course, we can't escape the society we live in, and we can't escape sometimes the hand we're dealt in terms of, COVID or, sometimes, but how you deal with the hand you're served is totally within your control. It's easy to forget that. And as I said, I try to encourage students I work with, like, don't worry about not doing something well enough. Worry about what you are going to bring to the table when you look at your music. Don't think, oh, I have to learn my text and I have to memorize it and I have to be in tune and like I want my coach to, like the diction coach to be proud of me and the conductor to be impressed by me. Like, what about you and what you bring to the role? You know what I mean? What about coming to the room with your ideas? Because tons of people have sung Contessa and Figaro, but like you haven't, and you're different than everyone. So like, what do you bring to the table? Like, you can decide that. You can take this line and you can interpret it this way. And you can just go ahead and do that. Like, you can do that. I would love to see it. As a conductor, I love when people come to the room as themselves with ideas. Even if I don't agree with you, I love having the conversation. So, I don't know. This is also a pep talk for myself. But
I'm always here for self-pep talk and collective pep talks. So some of those, we can do that later. But so now that we're kind of in this emboldened space, now that we are deprogrammed and we are Neo, fresh out of the matrix, that is the Conservatory Industrial Complex.
Except
Thanks
for
that,
James. James brought the glasses. So.
What other kind of concrete examples of things that people should be exploring or thinking about now that they are, hopefully also deprogrammed and feeling emboldened and liberated, so to speak?
Well, in my opinion, I think some important first steps for a lot of young artists coming out of the conservatory space, right, is we all get kind of sold this narrative of like, well, you better get your yap and you better get your thing and you better make your money from singing, like, haha, or you're going to be kind of, rotting off on the sidelines, right? And it's like, I think basically singers need to start engaging with the fact that, like, for how many of us are admitted to these programs, how many of us are studying singing, that the path professionally that we are presented that is accessible or like, probably accessible to all of us does not exist. There's not the number of singing jobs that your university that is asking you to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans to attend wants you to think there are. And you need to start considering that before you're engaging with going into debt to study this. You need to start engaging with that in terms of what you're envisioning for yourself in terms of a path outside of the conservatory part of the industrial complex. And it's not to say that it's all hopeless, but you do really need to be considerate of like what exists for you and what you expect. And also in terms of, it's a liberating thing in a way of like, I don't need to depend on simply participating in these like straightforward, systems that I've been given of like conservatory, yap, another yap, agent, auditions, et cetera, maybe scraping a career together, but starting to say like, there's a lot of us in this position, right? Like there's a lot of us graduating from these degree programs that, have our opera performance degrees or, our performance certificates or whatever. And like, we don't need to singularly invest in participating in like going to Wolf Trap and Santa Fe and doing this and that and getting into Lindemann and da. Like that's a great path if it works for you, but like we could also just like get together and be like, yo, I got a job, you got a job, like we're into this thing. Like, we can make collaborative spaces of art making that are not these places with, the crystal chandeliers and the whatever, and still do something that's like valuable and meaningful for ourselves, So I guess that would be like the fundamental thing I would say, like kind of coming out from where we're at of like recognizing like, maybe this isn't the be all end all. It's like we can like get together and like come up with some ideas, like because there's so many of us, you know, that are kind of on the outsides of this like, you know, picturesque view of industrial success, if you will. And like there's more of us than there are of them. And we're just as smart and we're just as creative, right? So like why not just kind of get together a little bit and start talking about where we go from here rather than like, how do we get into these programs? How do we do this thing? You know what I'm saying? So I guess that's kind of my.
I honestly think the pressure of trying to, you know, fit into these like certain name, you know, houses, and again, it's, you know, wonderful to work for big institutions with, you know, wonderful artists that they bring in.
I don't
but
know.
I think
You
it's
ask
easy.
them. Ask them and see how wonderful it is.
True. I think so. My point being, like, it's wonderful when you get to work in this art form. Like, you know, in terms of like why are we pursuing this art form, right? Like, probably because we love music, probably because we think it's emotionally powerful. You know, it's all the art forms coming together, and like, why do humans create art? Like the question. You know, it's to express ourselves. It's to access some, you know, what unifies us. It's to, you know, all of these things. And, you know, so opera, bringing all the art forms together, is arguably the most powerful one. And so it's easy to lose sight of that, trying to chase this, you know, industrial cookie cutter dream. It's easy for the people, you know, who maybe are feeling on the outskirts to lose sight of that. It's very easy for the people in it to lose sight of that, because even if you feel like you've made it once, this is a freelance industry, at least especially in the US. So like, even if you're hired everywhere this year, you might be hired nowhere next year. Like that to me is actually, that's another topic, but I think, really big problem with this industry, and makes a lot of people feel less empowered to speak up and to be themselves, because there isn't any protection against people, you know, like there's AGMA and there's unions, but at the same time, like no one can make a company hire you again next year. Like they might be able to prevent them from firing you this year, but you know, you have a lot of people worried about making waves, because then people might not want to hire you. And like, that's an awful position to be in, and once again, I think it makes people lose sight of why we're here. To me, it's to tell a story and to connect as humans and as human artists and with our audience, and all of these just logistics and chasing a certain cookie cutter vision make us lose sight of that. So.
I would also speak to James's point around being the artist that you want to be versus the artist that the industry tells you to be. I think that, you know, I definitely remember times in grad school, or not in grad school, in undergrad, as like a 18, 19-year-old, where I would be singing along in my car and then get into voice lessons, and my voice teacher would be like, I can tell that you're singing along to the radio, you know, in my voice lessons, or, you know, wanting to try out for the musical rather than try out for the opera.
How
or wanting
dare
to,
you enjoy music?
right? You know, and it's these situations where I think for opera in particular that you are told to specify. You're told to specify. There, we have the Fach system. You know, you're told that like, I'm a tall blonde soprano, so I'm going to be singing X, Y, and Z for the rest of my life, and that's all I can sing, and those are my choices. And then you get out into the industry, and it actually does you a disservice. I knew nothing about theater production when I got into this industry. Very, very little. I knew nothing about the admin side of arts. I knew nothing about marketing. I knew very, very little about what it actually takes to put on opera, and then what it actually takes to be a well-rounded artist. And all of that is diversifying, and it's like learning as much as you can about this industry, rather than, you know, it's spreading your net as wide as you possibly can, rather than trying to singularly study this one thing. Because if I dedicate my life to singing Tosca one day, I will never, ever, ever get hired to sing Tosca. But, you know, if I learn everything I can about theater, if I learn production management and how to stage manage and how to operate cameras and how to hang lights and do all of that, I will work in theater forever. And that's ultimately what I love to do. And that's ultimately what we all love to do, is to work in theater.
That also, it helps your chances, you know, whether it's like finding a job or like, because this industry is so driven socially, and understanding different parts of the industry will ultimately help you. Like, for example, COVID has given companies such a headache in terms of housing. Especially housing is now more limited than ever in places like New York, San Francisco, and because of people's choices, they would rather be where there would be people renting out homes, but they don't have them anymore because they're actually using them. So, but understanding that that is such a difficult thing to do for like over 400 people gathered all together for a summer festival, you know? So understanding that will give you so much more perspective, and ultimately opera is the game of perspectives.
Well, speaking of perspectives, I think that you've heard a lot from this panel here. Thank you all so much for your insights, your experiences, your trauma, dare I say. Well, we would love to hear any questions from our live audience, your perspectives on anything that was shared so far. God knows I have plenty, so.
I would love to hear you all speak on the rehearsal process, especially as it applies to kind of these conversations you've been having. I tend to find, especially re-entering the world after, you know, COVID got like slightly less bad when things opened up a little bit, I found myself a little disappointed with all of these conversations, incredible conversations I had. And then I come back to the rehearsal room and it would sort of feel like reverting all the way back. So I'd love to hear, especially, you know, as a teacher, as a singer, as a conductor, as a singer, and an admin, how you kind of approach the rehearsal process, how you wish the rehearsal process could be, but can't be for various reasons, and kind of what your goals and expectations are.
So, thank you for that. No, you're fine. It's actually a great way to demonstrate for our live audience. What we'll do here is that someone will ask a question, and then I'll reiterate it so you all can participate as well. So the question basically is the rehearsal process in this conversation. What about it should be different? What expectations do you have to make sure that the rehearsal process also reflects the changes and the values that you've shared here?
I share your frustration in expressing that there are a lot of great conversations happening and like some progress being made and definitely being talked about in the industry in terms of being more welcoming, accepting, supportive, etc. And then rehearsal, get back in the house, and a lot of it's kind of status quo. My goal in rehearsal is to create a really collaborative environment, because like where everyone is an equal, like where everyone has a say, best idea in the room wins. I certainly come in with plenty of opinions, but like I don't think they're better because I'm better than you and in charge. Like I believe in them because I thought a lot about them, but I would love to hear yours and let's discuss. And it really frustrates me as a conductor and someone who loves to collaborate that so many artists, so many singers come into the rehearsal room almost afraid to ask for what they need. And being an assistant conductor, I see it a lot because often I'll talk to singers after rehearsal and they'll express like, oh, you know, the conductor isn't going a tempo that works for me or this or that. And I'm like, oh, you should talk to them. And they're like, oh, but like, I don't know how they're gonna react. They might react badly. And I'm like, that's the most upsetting thing I've ever heard. Like you're up there singing. You're the one who has to do the thing. All they have to do is wave their stick slightly differently to help you do your thing the best you can do it. It's like honestly not a big deal on their part. So like you should be able, I think singers should be able to feel empowered to ask for what they need. At the same time, I as the conductor, if someone comes to me and says I want a different tempo, I'll talk about why. I may say for this story reason, for this musical reason, I'd like it to be like this. So what do you need? What do I think? How can we meet in the middle? Do you know what I mean? But it should be a discussion. Like we're all equal humans who have value and ideas and individuality. So I love that in a rehearsal process. I'm frustrated it's not the rehearsal process in more places. I also have begun to work with some artists who do also agree with that kind of rehearsal process, and the more we all can create it, support that, demand it, honestly, the better we'll all be, because the more ideas that are contributed, we shouldn't just have the conductor and director, like who died and made them king or queen or, you know, the ruler, the emperor, you know, everyone comes in with wonderful ideas, so we should all be able to share them.
I would love to add to that, and by saying it's so yes to everything that you said. And in the rehearsal process, like everything has always been about time, right? It's about time management. We have so much to do, etc. And I think right now there's like a lot of like social and political climate changing, and we want especially to be inclusive. There's been some changes that have really been upsetting certain people. And it's okay to be, first of all, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to have feelings. It's okay to express them. But we have no time in rehearsal process. So what I would like to do is, you know, I always like to offer solutions. Like there are no problems, there are only solutions. And moving forward, I learned a great tool from a colleague of mine, and it's this tool called, ouch, oops. So if someone says something that was offensive or upsetting to you, yet you're in the middle of the rehearsal process and you don't want to cause a commotion or anything and take away people's time, it's really just a matter of acknowledging that like something happened, and so you would say ouch as a reaction to whatever they may have said, and then the person who potentially offended would say oops, acknowledging that, oh, this was a mistake and it was a misunderstanding. And but if they wanted to talk about it, they can talk about it later, but for now the rehearsal process continues. And I feel like because there's so much fear going on, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being canceled, fear of being, X, Y, and Z, people are not willing to either say so or express themselves, or people are being overly expressive. And I would just like to eventually take fear out of the equation and have an open communication throughout.
Yeah, I think for me, on the really big picture, right? So I'm the person like booking the time in the rehearsal spaces. I'm the person making those big master schedules for the entire rehearsal timeline, right? I'm collaborating with directors and production staff of like 15, 20, 25 people who all have agendas and all have those agendas that they need to get done right then. To echo that around, there's never enough time to make an opera, right? We can have these conversations for hours and days and years and months and whatever. But I think that in what the artist can do, the best thing that a singer can do is, going back to what I was saying earlier about like diversifying your interests, but having a bigger picture idea of what it takes to put on a show. That it's yes, it's about collaborating with the conductor in this moment, but also in collaborating with the conductor in this moment, in this coaching, we have a whole opera to stage, and that's a long amount of time. And so I'd think, there's a delicate balance between how we can have open collaborative communication, and I think all of that comes from healthy communication, right? How we can be open and collaborative while recognizing that like we got shit to do and we have an opera to stage. And
to agree with you,
yeah.
but also to make a suggestion too that I think can help things be more efficient is like love when people ask for what they need. Like just tell me what you need. Like I am not a mind reader, the director's not a mind reader, and also you are not a mind reader. So like, just if you do this, it'll help me do this. Or like it would, I think I'm missing this because this. Like just tell people what you need and what
sure.
you mean. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Oh, and
Because
that makes it so much
that
easier.
actually makes it so much more fit. No one has to guess. No one has to mind read. The same thing doesn't have to keep being messed up. We all get, and this is also life advice. Like this is relationship advice. Like go to couples therapy and they're like, you should communicate.
Yeah.
So like honestly, just all treat opera like couples therapy and we'll solve a lot.
Any other questions?
This was already kind of touched upon, but we all just kind of agreed. I feel like individually, people in the arts industry have all said, when going into COVID, there's a lot about this industry that is toxic and things that need to change. But would you say that from the top of the industry, the big, the people who can actually make large changes, would you say that in this, now that we're going back to work after pandemic, still in it, but yeah, would you say that changes are being made in an effective way from the top? Yeah.
So just to reiterate, the question is basically, do folks with power and in power, the gatekeepers, are they a part of these conversations and actualizing these changes?
Ooh, that's heavy.
I would say because each company, they have their own budget, they have their own people. There are people who are working with outside organizations. For example, Asian Opera Alliance has had several communications with certain organizations, and I look forward to more. I look forward to hearing about more of those. I think the way to go about that, though, is always the squeaky wheel gets the attention. So like, be vocal about it and support each other, and don't be afraid to actually, like she says, what you need or help, and it should get their attention. And if it doesn't, then you also know where to go.
I guess the overarching answer to the question by the silence after you asked is, I don't think not enough. I think that the people with the biggest budgets, with the largest influence, with the most amount of money and power and influence in the industry are doing some, but all of that is not all of that necessarily. I'm grossly generalizing, but I think that a lot of that is in response to smaller companies and smaller organizations who are being the squeaky wheel in the industry. And I think that, we as, people in this industry in various capacities are those squeaky wheels being like, this needs to change and this is why. And we're slowly impacting change from the bottom up, and for very, very good reasons. But speaking very frankly, it doesn't I'm about to say this. It doesn't behoove large industries to change, because they have their donor base, they have their bodies and seats, they have their set budgets for years and years and years to come. They have cast lists cast 5 years out. It doesn't behoove them to change as much as we are yelling at them to change. So all we can do is yell louder.
I feel like also that's the whole point, is like, there is certainly a level of industrial kind of structural change that, because at least in terms of like, the singers of us that are either kind of just getting our feet wet or like kind of on the outskirts of like, where do I belong? There's so many of us, like we do have the opportunity to exert like pretty substantial like political, social, visible pressure on some of these institutions in a way that can be very good. But also outside of that context of us getting together and be like, how do we put the pressure on some of these places to like, either shame them or whatever into like making better choices. Like, how do we exist outside of these places? Because like, yeah, okay, the Met's always going to be there, like Chicago Lyric's always going to be there, like Sanford, whatever, all these A houses are always going to be there. But like outside of that, like we still exist. We still have something to say. And we cannot base our entire existence artistically off of like these places, So in a certain way, it's like, yes, like I hope they do well, but I don't really care how they do, we can do better.
Absolutely. Any last remarks from the panel before I close us out?
I would love to quickly respond to Megan saying how it doesn't, necessarily behoove the, top, the
right
top
now,
people in the
not in the
industry.
future.
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it doesn't behoove these larger institutions to change, because I do think long term, it does. It really does.
Absolutely, yes.
Like it for
Hope
sure.
you're listening.
It for sure. Because, so for example, a thing that, people have been talking about for years is, we need to diversify perspectives, diversify who we see on stage, diversify who we see on the podium. And so a lot of people have been calling for that because, those of us who feel outside the box, gender-wise, race-wise, in any type of way, in any marginalized capacity, didn't see ourselves supported or reflected, in what was being put on stage, and, called for change. And a lot of companies now feel, okay, to not get canceled, I have to check this diversity box on my list, which then turns into tokenizing people instead of for the reason. So here's what are the reasons we want to diversify? And so I'm opening this whole can of worms when we're trying to end our panel discussion, but you're welcome. So. So for me, there are several important reasons. One being, if you don't actively try to have diverse voices and perspectives in the room, you're just missing a lot of perspectives. You're missing a lot of talent, you're missing a lot of perspectives. You don't know what you don't know. You can only know your own experience. And so if you only have your experience, you're literally just missing all the experience this person with a different life than you has. And so you benefit by just having more perspectives, first of all. Second of all, honestly, if big opera houses are worried about audiences, well, you're going to have a more diverse audience be interested if they see themselves and their stories reflected from your company. And so for me, these are the two, and there are many more, but these are two big reasons that long-term companies should care about things like this. And the first step has turned into, you know, once again, a lot of us demanding that change. Companies perhaps like understanding the idea, not wanting to be canceled or called out or whatever, and then sometimes, like, it's good that we're seeing more diversity on the podium, on the stage, in the administration, in more places. Not enough, but we're seeing more. Sometimes it feels tokenizing when it's okay, we have one woman conductor in our program, we have like one, you know, singer of color in a lead role where normally we would just cast a white person. Like, great, but we should still be putting people in these positions like for the reason of who they are as an artist. Just maybe diversify the artists you're considering for that position and then pick the one you think is right for the position, right? Because it's tokenizing just to put someone in a spot because of their identity. Like, if you just put someone in a role because of their identity, whether they're right for the role or not, that's like also racist and sexist, right? Like that's also.
Well, if you're putting
So-
people in there based on that, but not reforming like the systemic functions of the industry, you're just
Yeah.
exposing people to like more trauma in a shitty system.
Yes.
So I don't care if you're casting like more diverse people if you're not like fundamentally
Yes.
reforming the structures in which are harming those groups in the first
Agree.
place. Like,
Agree.
congrats, but next, you know, like,
Yeah,
please,
agree.
please.
So it feels like as an industry to me, like at least that, you know, the smaller companies are perhaps I mean able also to change faster because, you know, they're smaller and started by people who, you know, were creative enough and innovative enough to start a company from nothing. So, you know, it's going to take more effort and probably a longer time to steer a bigger ship. But I do think all of us talking about these things and raising our voices and being the squeaky wheel, I do think it'll have an effect. I do think there are people listening. I want to believe there are people listening. And I do think talking more, people will have to listen, right? For whatever reason, they'll have to. And then also, like, the more of us, you know, as we further our careers, like, pull people up with us. Make sure whenever you are in a position to have any kind of influence, like, use your influence for good. Don't just think of your own survival, but, like, how can you actually make things better? It's a big responsibility, you know, in any position you're in, so.
And that's honestly how we all thrive, truly. Well, with that, I hate to sound like a corporate pride float, but it seems like the thesis of this is be brave, be smart, be you, find your people, and go out and create, friends. So, thank you, everyone that is sitting here. You all are fantastic people. Yes, a round of applause for them. And thank you, Stone Street Studios, for having us here. Big shout out to our folks working things behind the scenes. Could do none of this without you. And thank you to our audience here. You all have been utterly fantastic. Such great questions. Also such unprocessed trauma. We've all been there, still there. And thank you all watching a live stream. We will see you soon, hopefully. Megan, anything before I kind of wrap us up?
Yeah, thank you all so much. We're really excited for this season. We have 2 really incredible operas planned. Next up for CLO is Uncovered. It's the New York premiere of Lori Laitman's new opera at Here Arts Center and November 16th through 19th. So we're really excited.
Well, friends, onward. Good night.